Even if you consider yourself a horror aficionado, you'd likely be forgiven if you've never heard of today's chosen topic. Despite being a relatively niche subgenre, survival horror games have managed to capture and terrify the imaginations of countless gamers over several generations. Titles like Resident Evil and Silent Hill being at the forefront of this. Not every spook-filled scavenger fest can spawn a multi-million-dollar franchise with endless spin-offs and movie adaptations though. Some are destined to fail, and none failed harder than Ubisoft's first ever horror game, Cold Fear.
Anna, hang on!
Hanson! Cold Fear.
Releasing in March of 2005, 2 months after Resident Evil 4, honestly this game had no chance, the game failed to amaze critics and instead horrified its publisher by only managing to ship 70,000 copies in its first year, and that's across PC, Xbox and PS2 combined. Yeah, it was a colossal flop. And the only real question left is, was that fair? Let's put our life jackets on and dive straight on in to Cold Fear. Right off the bat, Cold Fear wastes no time throwing the player right into the gameplay, a trait you'll very quickly get used to. You see, while Cold Fear does have what you could call a story, it's quite apparent that it was never the developer's focus. And I know that because it can be summed up in a small paragraph. Answering a call from the CIA, a United States Coast Guard named Tom Hanson boards a mysterious vessel after a Navy SEAL team were wiped out. Hanson quickly learns that the Russian mafia were experimenting with a deadly parasite that has turned the residents of the ship into Axos, or as normal people call them, zombies. In reality, there might be a little more nuance to the narrative than that, such as the lead scientist pursuing their own daughter, much like William Birkin of Resident Evil 2 infamy. But much like the game that inspired it, Cold Fear knows to let the location and atmosphere be the primary storyteller. One of the few common praises the game received from early reviewers was the attention to detail in the environments, which is very hard to argue with. Every room has some kind of significant style or detail that makes it stand out in your mind every time you re-enter. Whether it's the holding bay housing an infected whale corpse, or the docile zombies stuck in the damaged bunk beds. In terms of variation, Cold Fear may offer very slim pickings, but it nonetheless used what it had to craft a disorientating maze that repeatedly stumbles over that fine line between being fun to explore and frustrating as hell to traverse. I don't think that would be much of a problem if it wasn't for the insane amount of doors that you encounter. Now, this isn't an issue contained only to Cold Fear. Even the first Resident Evil could eventually get tedious with its overly drawn out door opening cutscenes. However, that was a creative way to mix immersing the player with subtly hiding loading screens. Cold Fear's loading screens aren't particularly long, but the lack of any creative flair and the sheer amount of doors you'll consistently be passing through makes backtracking around the ship a rather dull affair. And the last word that should describe your tense, atmospheric survival horror game is dull. Assuming I can forgive the tedium involved with exploring, I really feel this game deserves so much more praise for the way it handles and presents the enemy monsters. The game constantly finds new ways to throw sudden surprise attacks at you. Some of my favourites include the tentacle spider-like creatures bursting from the whale's body in a moment that brings to mind scenes from John Carpenter's The Thing, which is always encouraged by me, as well as this Russian dude slowly rolls from behind a table. It's really the typical zombie-type enemies that steal the show for me though, largely for one reason alone. They only stay dead if you manage to land a critical headshot, which is a crucial aspect of so many zombie movies, which video games rarely seem able to nail down. Even more modern releases, like Dying Light, want to insinuate that attacks to the head do more damage, but they always refuse to commit when you actually score a bullet to the brain. So the fact that a forgotten lower budget survival horror from 2005 absolutely nails that concept is just a big, well-deserved fuck you to all the zombie games of the present. Speaking of getting fucked by Cold Fear zombies, in typical survival horror fashion, most of the combat revolves around conserving ammo to avoid being helplessly mauled to death. Unlike most other survival horror games though, if you do run out of ammo, which you will, you're totally screwed. While games like Silent Hill 2 provide wide enough passages to make avoiding enemy attacks possible, Cold Fear does not give a shit. Linking back to my other problems with the game's map design, the majority of the rooms and hallways are barely big enough for you to squeeze through alone at times. So the prospect of trying to slip past an enemy is ridiculous. Not helping matters is the character's uncanny ability to never run in the direction you need. A part of that could be my suckiness with a keyboard, but I feel pretty justified including it as a criticism after reading the complaints of other reviewers at the time. Also, I kinda remember the main character handling like a blind dog with two legs from when I used to play this game as a kid anyway. All that means is that your only real option when dealing with the exos is to blast your way through every room, so you better start preserving ammo like you've never preserved before. For all the reasons I've spent this whole video detailing, Cold Fear may feel similar to a Resident Evil game in terms of tone and story content, but funnily enough, stylistically, it's much more akin to another of my all-time favourite games, Metal Gear Solid 2. The comparison is especially poignant considering how the main setting summons very evocative memories of the opening tanker level in that game. Even the health bars and stair climbing animations are designed in a borderline copyright infringing kind of way. It doesn't end there either. At first glance, it'd be easy to assume Cold Fear's static camera angles are beholden to the early Resident Evil games, but in execution, they're much more reminiscent of the original Metal Gear Solid. The way the camera can sometimes move with the player, and the ability to switch to a closer in, more focused viewpoint when aiming, feels so parallel to the stealth classic. Resident Evil crossed with Metal Gear Solid is a combo that sounds amazing, but also like it'd be practically impossible to pull off in a satisfying way. And unfortunately, I'm not about to surprise you all by saying that Cold Fear somehow manages it, because it doesn't. It really doesn't. While I have fond memories, it's still a deeply flawed game that deserves a lot more criticism lobbied against it. Which is what makes it such a shame that the game was slammed by most review outlets for essentially being an inferior knockoff of Resident Evil 4. And it's a shame because considering that the development for both games would have been running around the same time frame, it would have been impossible for Cold Fear to actively rip off RE4. Making the negative comparisons both a compliment because it shows that the devs had similar ideas and concepts to a game that many consider the best ever made, but it's also its biggest downfall. Had Cold Fear released 3 months earlier, it might have found a more forgiving audience. And had Resident Evil 4 never existed, it could have possibly been appreciated by horror fans as one of the survival horror classics. Thanks for watching the video, guys. Have you played Cold Fear? What did you think of it? What's your favourite survival horror game? Mine would have to be either Resident Evil 3 or the King Kong game. Please feel free to share any and all of your thoughts in the comments below, and if you enjoyed the video, we'd really appreciate if you left a like or even subscribed. Also, if any of you have anything to give, our Patreon is in the description. That said, we deeply appreciate any and all kinds of support we get. Thanks again for watching, and cheers.